Welcome to GRE. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Do homeowners build wealth because they own that home, or is it really for other reasons? Though homeowners can participate in leveraged price appreciation, they often have higher monthly carrying costs than a renter does. We're talking with the author of the Homeowner Wealth Formula today, but not before my rant against hardwood flooring today on Get Rich Education. A lot of investors choose either cash flow or home price appreciation, but one real estate market could provide both. Jacksonville, Florida, with 27% lower home prices than the national median and 1% higher rents, their market has appreciated 34% more than other comparable cash flow markets over the last 30 years. Get positive cash flow today and appreciation for tomorrow. They often have available inventory in Jacksonville. Start at cashflowandgrowth.com. Hey, is your IRA in a real estate syndication? Yikes, a 37% UBIT tax could hit you, but you still have a chance to set up your EQRP and avoid this. Did you make too much money in 2020 and need more deductions? Now federal law lets you set up an EQRP in 2021 and get deductions for last year, retroactively. Even put old IRA and 401k money in Bitcoin, gold, or your own business. Get control of all of your retirement money, tax and penalty free. Text EQRP in all capital letters to 72,000.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Here it is. Hey, you're inside episode 340 of Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. You can achieve financial freedom earlier in this life of yours if you master learning how to turn your equity into cash flow. Now, net worth matters, sure, but your monthly residual income, that's what's vital for that freedom. I think that real wealth, in its highest form, that's when you have the ability to wake up and tell yourself that you can truly do whatever you want to do today. Because cash flow makes that happen, that is exactly why you want to turn your equity into cash flow. In fact, equity to cash flow, that can be quite the enduring mantra for the freedom seeker. But when you make a mortgage principal payment, now you've instead converted some of your cash flow to equity. Well, converting cash flow to equity, that's exactly the opposite of what we just agreed that the freedom formula is, which is, again, turning equity to cash flow. Any extra principal payment on a 30-year amortizing loan, well, that doesn't increase your cash flow at all. It immediately reduces your liquid cash, and then you still have to make the same minimum mortgage payment the following month. Now, that does shorten your term. A few extra principal payments might take your term from 30 years down to 29 years. But at what expense? Well, at the expense of your cash today, and they are the dollars that really count. Cash in your pocket now. When you make an extra principal payment, remember, here's what you're saying to the bank. Hey, Mr. Banker, here's an extra $500 principal payment. Don't pay me any interest on it. If I need it back, I'll pay you fees. Oh, and I'll even have to prove to you that I qualify again. All right, now you've also lost leverage on that property, and you've denied yourself the opportunity to put that $500 toward a small down payment for another investment property, which would create even more financial leverage for you, and hopefully some cash flow too. And you might have just thought of a new way why, once again, financially free beats debt free. And yes, did you know that I actually got that phrase trademarked with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office a year or two ago? Yes, I did. Financially free beats debt free. And I did that right at the same time that I had Don't Quit Your Daydream trademarked. In any case, remembering that financially free beats debt free will help you find the best and highest use of your investing dollar in real estate. And then there's inflation, because inflation debases your debt and your equity at the same rate. Well, debasing your debt is financially good for you, so keep a higher proportion of debt on and inflation debasing your equity is bad for you. So then you can arbitrage that by keeping low equity positions in many properties as long as you're first attentive to durable cash flows. Though in a lot of markets, now homeowners, they do have to pay higher monthly expenses than renting an equivalent place. Homeowners do, however, benefit from leverage, and renters do not. We'll discuss that more today. Now, I think that on a prior episode, I made a quick mention about something that I've never fully addressed. And, let me approach it this way with you. Let me ask you this. When you think of your home, your primary residence that you live in, what sounds nicer and homier? Option A is soft, warm, and quiet, or option B is hard, cold, and noisy. Come on, pretty easy choice, right? If you could live more of your life soft, warm, and quiet, then why would any sane person choose a life of hard, cold, and noisy? Well, that's exactly what a lot of people do, though. I would even say that most people do that at this point. And what is hard, cold, and noisy? What I'm talking about here is hardwood floor or any hard surface floor. Now, why in the world do so many people choose hardwood floor right there for their own home, including the abject heresy of putting it right in their living room, right in the very heart of their home, rather than some nice plush wall-to-wall carpeting, which is the soft, warm, quiet option that I was talking about? I guess I'm just different than most people. I don't get the hardwood flooring thing. The same goes for vinyl plank flooring, or if it's just Pergo type of laminate hardwood flooring, whatever you want to call it. Now, for your rentals, yeah, I get the hardwood flooring thing. In fact, I put hard surface flooring throughout my rentals. Tenants seem to tolerate it, even prefer it, and that is better for us as landlords. You don't have to live on it if it's in your rentals. Plus, carpet might have to be replaced after every 2 or 3 tenancies, depending on your quality of tenant. And then the hardwood or vinyl plank, well, that can last decades. So yeah, hardwood flooring makes sense in rentals. But why in the heck do so many people want it in their owner-occupied home? Bah, I don't get it. It is dreadful. Roll some carpet over that stupid, cold, hard, noisy floor. Yes, I know that I'm in the minority here. You may very well not agree with me, but just listen to my line of thinking. I hear people say that, for their own home, hardwood is easier to keep clean. Well, I say, why should keeping your floor clean be a problem? What kind of lives are people living? And they might say that they have kids or that they have a dog. Well, that's fine, but my gosh, then just get one cleaning company or person that you like and trust and have them come over every week at the same time, and then they can clean it while you're at church. Or if you like to go out to your favorite restaurant every week at the same time or something like that. Automate the cleaning. But come on now, don't live most of the 168 hours of your week on something cold and hard and noisy. You could have carpet instead. Now, I think that a hard surface makes sense in some places, like your kitchen, yes. But ever since hardwood floors seemed to become common and preferred about 20 or 25 years ago, what do most people do with these hard floors anyway? They kind of realize that they're sacrificing too much, and then so in the middle of the hardwood floored room, they add a smaller carpet rectangle and they put that out in the center anyway. Oh, well then you're living smaller, it doesn't cover wall to wall, it's unpadded underneath. Oh, why all this hardwood floor? And plus, unless there is radiant heat underneath the floor, it's going to feel colder than carpet does. And it's also noisier. Go ahead and research that. I mean, wouldn't you like more quiet in your home? Yes, sound travels further and it's louder across hard floors than it is carpeted floors, even people's voices. And then it's even worse if you have the paws of a pet stomping on the floor. It both makes more noise where their feet fall on the floor, plus that noise travels further. So just read up about that. Carpet attenuates sound better. Ugh, hardwood floor, it is stupid, it's dreadful. Roll some carpet over that and upgrade your quality of life. I've got one friend, he's kind of simpler in his taste, I think. He says that he likes hardwood floor because it just looks more rich than carpet does. It looks rich? How in the heck could it look rich when every $800 apartment has it as flooring? Ugh. Maybe part of this too is that I like to get down on the floor and do these HIIT type of workouts, but that is just one small part. So for my rental units, yes, I add hardwood flooring or more commonly vinyl plank really. But at home, it doesn't make any sense. My current home actually has more hardwood flooring in it than I like. Gosh, I can't understand why people don't want more comfort in their lives. This should be simple. So consider falling in love with some nice, deep, plush, warm, quieter carpet. If you want to live better, upgrade from that cold and hard and noisier life. Hardwood floor is stupid. It's dreadful. Roll some carpet over that. That is enough for the flooring rant. Before we talk to our guest about homeowner wealth today, if you're looking to tie up more income property at these historically low mortgage rates, and yes, mortgage rates are up off the recent bottom, but they're still mega low. In fact, mortgage rates are still lower than they were 3 years ago at this time. They're lower than they were 2 years ago at this time. And they're even a little bit lower than they were 1 year ago at this time. People want to know what is going on at greturnkey.com. That is the website where I buy my own properties. You can just copy me and do what I do and buy properties there. A new addition over there is the Cincinnati market. That's where you can find some of the best rent to price ratio investment properties in the nation, right there in the southwest corner of Ohio. The provider in Memphis and Little Rock, which is the same provider, they are still sourcing 7 to 9 new properties every week. Pretty impressive with the scarce inventory that we have today. And these are fully renovated properties from new HVACs to new roofs. They have rent to price ratios still around 0.9%. And purchase prices are commonly right around $100K, so still really affordable. I've walked inside these types of homes myself right there with this same provider. It's a quality product in a decent neighborhood. Yes, by the way, they are the oldest continuously operating turnkey company in the entire nation there. Again, serving Memphis, Tennessee and Little Rock, Arkansas. Also, check out all of our Florida providers there at GRE Turnkey. A lot of brand new construction property there with those Florida providers. Some of the single-family homes are still under $200K. Yeah, for brand new, you kind of wonder how long that's going to last. So just do what I do. Copy me. Get pre-qualified for a mortgage and buy right where I buy there. Again, at greturnkey.com. Let's discuss homeowner wealth. Today's guest is one of the brightest economists that I've ever known. Years ago, one of the first things I knew about him is that he was an outspoken critic on conventional retirement planning, which is precisely when I knew that he was a kindred spirit. He's a finance MBA with 30 plus years of pro experience. He's a chartered financial analyst, and he authored a number of books on finance and economics. He's an expert on mortgages. He has references or articles in Reuters, MarketWatch, U.S. News and World Report, MSN Money, Seeking Alpha, Business Insider, NASDAQ, Morningstar, and more. It has been more than 5 years since he was last here helping you understand real estate wealth on GRE back in February of 2016. I'd like to give a big warm welcome back to Daniel Amerman.
Thank you, Keith. It's so good to be back again.
Where are you joining us from today?
Duluth, Minnesota.
Yes, and I'm in that icebox of Anchorage, Alaska. We're in 2 of the nation's iceboxes.
Technically, Duluthians moved to Anchorage to get warm.
That is true if you look it up, as counterintuitive as it seems. But Daniel, you have 2 books that you've written, hopefully indoors there in Duluth, in the Homeowner Wealth series. The first of those 2 books is called The Homeowner Wealth Formula, and the second is The 8 Levels of the Multiplication of Homeowner Wealth. So I want to learn more about the research that you did, what you found, and just what are the long-term averages for gains in single-family home equity over 3, 7, and 10 years. Tell us more.
This is an area that I've been fascinated by and have worked with for many years. Working for an investment bank, I closed my first multi-million-dollar multifamily housing deal back in 1983. So it's been a little while
Yeah.
and have worked in the area a great deal. But I also enjoy research and just trying to figure out how things really work. And after many years of learning about and doing deals and so forth, I was just really interested to find out as much as I could about historically how these things have really worked. Have we really understood where the money comes from, how reliable it is, what's the best way to access it, and so forth. So on top of all the earlier years, I did an intensive study of the entire period for which we have good pairs-based methodology information available for housing.
Pairs-based, meaning following and looking at that same exact home over time.
Yes, the issue is that the story of what's happened with housing, particularly since the 1940s or so, is just amazing in terms of how reliable it has been in terms of the growth of the value of homes and so forth. One part of that makes it a little bit problematic is that homes have typically gotten a little bit larger over the years, and they've had more amenities, and they're more in metropolitan areas instead of rural areas. So you can't just track average house prices.
Right,
you have to do like to like.
Right, because there's obsolescence and there's yard size and all these other factors that go into home values.
Well, we've got really good, solid pairs-based information going back until 1975. So what I did was I took that entire database from 1975 to 2019, looking like to like, and I broke out every single possible 1 to 10 year average home ownership period between 1 and 10 years. There were 44 different possible 1-year home ownership periods. There were 35 different possible 10 years. For instance, 1975 to 1985 would be a 10-year. 1990 to 2000 would be a 10-year. 2009 to 2019 would be a 10-year. And when you break those all out, there's a total of 395 possible different ownership periods. And I looked at every single one of them and tried to find out, where did the money actually come from?
Yeah.
What was the best return? What was the worst return? What was the risk? What I found out was an amazing story. And this can also be confirmed if you look at the Federal Reserve's triennial survey of consumer finances, which is the definitive work in terms of consumer finance in the country that was most recently released in 2019. Actually, the information came out in September of last year. What that shows is just some amazing statistics. About half of the net worth of a homeowner is typically in their home equity. And if you look at home equity and you compare it to retirement accounts, everyone talks about retirement accounts all the time. Home equity is on average about twice the size of the retirement account. And if you compare net worth for homeowners versus renters, what the Federal Reserve shows is that the median net worth for homeowners is 40 times greater than the median net worth for renters. I know that
stat. Yes.
And it's because there is this wealth creation machine, this wealth creation formula that's working away. It's been working away for decades. You didn't have to know it was there. It helps a lot, particularly if you're going to be an investor, to understand exactly how that wealth formula works. But it works there regardless, and it's produced these amazing results. When I looked at every possible 3-year home ownership period between 1975 and 2019, what I found out was that the average was for homeowners to almost double their money, to double their equity. Now, this is with an 80% LTV mortgage.
In 3 years.
In 3 years. How else do you do that on average, year after year, for a nation as a whole?
Daniel, in my opinion, most homeowners that own an appreciating home, they don't even understand financial leverage, even though they're the beneficiaries of it. Gains from leverage often exceed those from unlevered compound interest.
They totally do. And I looked at it for 7 years. And for every family across the country for all these decades, if they had bought the home with an 80% LTV mortgage, on average in 7 years, they would have tripled their money.
Yeah.
And in 10 years, they would have quadrupled their money. Why is home equity on average twice as large as a retirement account for a family? Why does a homeowner have 40 times the net worth, median basis? That's why. That's a big part of the reason why we have these amazing returns that are going on. And these are not something special. This is not being smart. This is not being lucky. This is just the long-term averages across all these different 3, 7, and 10-year home ownership periods. And of course, that totally applies to real estate investors as well.
So we've established this statistic that I already knew about, just like you stated, that homeowner net worth is typically 40 times that of a renter's net worth. But in some areas of the country, it seems to make sense, even on a financial basis, to be a renter if you can rent for substantially less than what a homeowner would pay in principal, interest, taxes, insurance, maintenance, repairs, utilities, property tax, and all those sorts of things. So I understand that a levered homeowner can build wealth, but how about some of these other expenses and how they factor in? And is the fact that a homeowner has a greater net worth than a renter just part of the fact that they are better educated and they tend to have higher incomes and so on than the average renter does? Or do you think there's a substantial wealth effect from that homeownership component alone? Again, this can be parsed by region.
As we both know, real estate is the supremely local investment.
Yeah.
And there can always be different circumstances in different financial conditions, in different metropolitan areas and so forth. And I wouldn't presume to say that there's this one formula that governs everything. But what I can say definitively, to the best of my knowledge, I've done the most thorough research on this that has been done to date. If we look at a national average basis, and I'm not looking at all the other considerations of home ownership, rent versus buy decisions, but if we're just looking at turning money into more money, turning equity into much more equity, that on a national average basis, home ownership, whether it be to live in the home or to rent out the home, and then there's the possibility of renting out your own home, owning another home, and renting that to someone else. I think you kind of like that idea.
Yeah.
Those, wherever someone is a homeowner, we have a remarkable history in terms of consistency in creating wealth via home ownership. And I'll leave to you the question about whether we're better off living in that home ourselves. The same information that I developed is absolutely applicable to real estate investors in single family homes.
Oh, 100%. That's where we have the ability to outsource our debt service to tenants when we rent a home to somebody else. So that really portends well as a long-term formula for real estate investors a lot of times. Yeah, I think I have a related question. You talk about these 3, 7, and 10-year periods, a homeowner with a mortgage. That brings something to mind. A lot of times a homeowner with a mortgage who might have gotten an interest rate as low as 3% these days, they might want to go ahead and keep debt on that home because they feel like, well, now they're borrowing against that home at 3%. It's also tax advantage, and they can instead reinvest funds at 10%, therefore creating a 7% arbitrage for themselves. But if that homeowner has a 3% mortgage rate and they sell their home after 7 years, they might have paid about as much in interest as they did in principal payments over those 7 years. So then my question is, what is the effective interest rate on that?
They're paying 3%, you're saying, and they could have been investing it at 10?
Yeah, and we can just disregard that 10% portion for a moment.
Okay, all right.
If a homeowner's paying a 3% mortgage interest rate, just a 30-year fixed amortizing loan, and they sell that home after 7 years, they can look back, and I don't have an amortization table in front of me, but say they can look at that and say, after paying a 3% mortgage interest rate, I still paid just as much in interest as I did in principal. So therefore, what was the effective interest rate that I paid since that 30-year amortization is front-loaded toward interest payments?
The really interesting part is, and I approach this as a financial mathematician as well as someone who is used to working in the area, there's actually 2 types of benefits to our extremely low interest rate environment. And one of them is obviously we have much lower mortgage payments for any given value of home that we're purchasing. And that substantially increases the ability of the average person to buy a home, to pay more money for it. And that's all been tremendously supportive in terms of these increases in home prices that we've seen. But there's a kicker that goes with that I think most people don't understand. That is, if you look at the formula, if you look at the mathematics of mortgage amortizations, it's not constant, but it's highly variable depending on what the interest rate is. I'm just going to get a little bit geeky. It's actually all based on the compound interest formula. It underlies everything.
Tell us about that compound interest formula. Yeah.
What it is that each time, and actually I wrote this in a book back in 1992, and it was the funniest thing. I looked out on the web 10 years later, and there are people making a living giving podcasts and so forth about what I had written about it. Because the way I described it is that paying down debts is like or when we're amortizing or when we're investing, either way, it's a snowball. It rolls down a hill. That's what compound interest is. And the higher the interest rate, the faster it rolls down the hill. If you have a 10% mortgage interest rate, every time you make a mortgage principal payment, you save 10% in interest on every month thereafter for the rest of the mortgage. So that builds very powerfully. If you look at the old mortgages that were 10%, 12%, even 8%, very little of our initial payments went to principal amortization. It almost all went to interest because we could make these little bitty principal payments on the front end, and the power of compound interest would be so much over 30 years that they could pay off this amazing mortgage, but it's kind of back end loaded. When you have very low mortgage rates, the power of compound interest is mostly negated. And that means that a much larger portion of your mortgage payment is going to principal. And just to kind of cut to the bottom line here, let's consider three different possibilities. One of them is current mortgage rates around 3%. Another is historic mortgage rates, let's say in the 1970s, that could have easily been 13, 14%. And let's look at the average mortgage rate over the last almost half century. Now, if we have a very high mortgage rate over the first 10 years, you would only pay off a few percent of the entire mortgage. If you have a more average mortgage rate, you're going to pay off 10% of the mortgage. If you have a very low interest rate like we have right now, you're not only saving that money in a monthly basis, but you're going to pay off 20% of your mortgage in a period of 10 years. And this is chapters 8 and 9 from the first book. It's really fascinating to work this out because you have a double risk reduction. If you can get a very low mortgage rate, you have the benefit of much lower monthly payments, but at the very same time, when your tenants are making your mortgage payments for you, they're guaranteeing that you're going to pay off about 20% of your mortgage over 10 years. And if you start off with an 80% LTV mortgage, and you pay down 20%, then you're almost doubling your money right there. And that's before any real property appreciation, and that's before inflation. And that's been the fascinating part about doing this research. As you can tell, I'm pretty interested in it. There's all these different components. I break it out into 8 different levels of wealth multiplication, and they all work together. It's like a little symphony orchestra playing together, how they've reliably performed over time.
We are digging deep on mortgages, housing, and how to build wealth with economist Daniel Amerman. More when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. This is Get Rich Education. The people that our listeners can't stop talking about are Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. They provided you with more loans than anyone. It's where I got my last few loans, and they finance single-family income property up to 4plexes. They're the #1 lender for both beginners and veterans. Start your pre-qualification, chat with President Chaley Ridge personally, and you'll end up with your custom plan for expanding your cash flowing portfolio. Start at ridgelendinggroup.com. You know, starting in real estate seems hard for some. Even experienced investors can find it difficult to achieve the success that they had hoped for. What if there was one small change everyone could make that would solve these challenges? Allie Boone offers a book that really no one else has. It's an easy-to-understand glimpse into the real estate investing industry and your mindset. It's life lessons on hacking your mind before you hack your wallet. Her book to grab on Amazon is called Not Your How-To Guide to Real Estate Investing.
This is Hal Elrod, author of The Miracle Morning, and listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, and don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to GRE, where we're always doing the right thing before we do things right. I'm Keith Weinhold. We're talking with economist Daniel Ammerman. Daniel, based on your research, from an investment perspective, what's the importance of a home becoming genuinely more valuable versus just having a higher dollar-denominated price due to inflation? And I think really this is about an increase in price versus an increase in value. And one thing that I've told the audience recently, Daniel, is lately I think it's easier to parse out where this price appreciation is coming from. Recently, it's been more due to genuine appreciation to demand vastly outstripping supply rather than it is inflation. So what are your thoughts on home appreciation coming from genuine appreciation or inflation?
This is really very interesting stuff. And that's the difference between the first and second books. In the Homeowner Wealth Formula, I break out what is by far the largest increases in home value on average over the years, and actually real price appreciation, increases in inflation-adjusted value for the same home, pairs basis, and so forth, is not important enough to make the first four. It's based really on inflation and mortgages, and the relationship between mortgages and inflation creates the vast majority of wealth for homeowners and investors. Now, what I explore in the second book, the 8 levels of homeowner wealth multiplication, the second 4 levels all are related to. They're multiples of that real increase in home value. Again, if you look at all 35 of the possible 10-year home ownership periods that we have good information on, what we know is that on average, on a inflation-adjusted basis, homes increase in value 9.9% on a national average basis, just shy of 10%. So if you started off with $40,000, you would on average make $4,000. When you take every other level of the creation of wealth into account, which is inflation, buying it with a mortgage, the amortization that the tenants are paying for, and then the different multiplicative relationships. This is fascinating because it's a literal formula for building wealth. You take those into account, and they increase equity on average. The national average over close to half a century has been by 311%, so that $1 becomes $4.11. If we compare that 9.9% to the 311%, long-term historic average, national averages, what we see is that real increases in value on average only account for 3% of the total over 10 years. And if you go out 30 years, it's 1.7%. So it's much smaller than most people think it is. The real power here, and this is a very good thing, is in the relationship between inflation, which is really the compound interest formula, and the mortgage and the amortization. That is actually where the vast majority of the wealth is created. There's also other multiplicative relationships, and this is something I think that's really important for real estate investors to keep in mind. Let's say that you have a home that you make a good buy on, and it's really going up in value. At the very same time, we have a significant amount of inflation that's occurring, correct? You don't add the real increase in home value to the inflationary increase, but they have a multiplicative relationship. So you multiply inflation times the real increase in home value, and then you take into account the mortgage and you do another level of multiplication on top of that, and that's the history of this wealth creation. That's where it's really coming from. It's multiplying all these different things together. That's why there's 8 levels to the multiplication of wealth.
Yeah, tell us more about these multiple levels of wealth multiplication. You have 8 of them in your book. And I know you also talk about wealth maps, and that all of this has something to do with winning the lottery. So tell us about these levels of wealth multiplication, wealth maps, and what this has to do with winning the lottery.
To explain all 8 levels properly, that's like the first 14 chapters between the 2 books. So that's a little hard to do in 5 minutes in a podcast. But there are multiple levels. And they are basically, there's inflation being multiplied because of the mortgage. There is real price appreciation. There's real price appreciation being multiplied because of the mortgage. And then we have inflation times real price appreciation times the mortgage. And I get it. Most people don't really understand that. But it arguably accounts for about a third of the net worth of a lot of people who are in their, let's say, 60s today, and they've paid off their home mortgage. It's these multiplications that are just steadily working away year after year under the surface. The problem was I was studying all these different years, and I had worked out all these different levels of multiplication. And even as the researcher doing this, it was starting to get a little bit difficult to keep track of all 8 levels for all these different ways of people making money, because that's what I was studying. It's a history of making money. It's a history of wealth creation. It's how it's really worked out in practice. What I worked out was what I call a wealth map that takes every source of wealth creation. And with an 80% LTV mortgage, I worked it out to 19 different sources. And there is a visual surface area for each source that you can, in a minute, if I'm looking at any given time period or any group of averages, and that's what's presented in the books, you can see exactly how important each component was in creating wealth. And that actually varies radically over the years. And when you understand that, you can understand the flow of wealth and what's really going on. One of the things that I worked out, and this is really fairly amazing, is let's think about winning the lottery.
Everyone likes to think about that.
Yeah. Let's say you go down to a gas station, you buy a right ticket, and you make $250,000, and you walk out of there with $250,000 in your pocket. Or you could go to the casino and you could play the slots, and you could walk out of there with $250,000 in your pocket. You got a smile on your face as you're thinking about this. Here's the question: how many people really walk out of gas stations with an extra $250,000 in their pocket? How many people really walk out of casinos with an extra $250,000 in their pocket? It almost never happens. The odds are tremendously against it. But if you look at the long-term history of homeownership, we look at all 35 possible 10-year homeownership periods, 8 of those times, or 23% of the time, the people who bought those homes had their homes appreciate in value by an amount that was about equal to or greater than the entire home purchase price. If you bought a home for $250,000, there's about a 1 out of 4 chance, what history shows us, that you're going to walk away with that full price of the home.
Interesting.
$250,000 after 10 years. That's amazing. We have a national history of tens of millions of people winning the lottery through buying single-family homes, either to live in them or to invest in them. And they're actually almost 1 time out of 4 that got that $250,000, whatever the case may be, winning lottery ticket.
Yeah, we all like to think and dream about that.
Except this is reality.
That's right. You can turn your dream into reality by doing this. And I'm often quick to remind people that the return from home equity is always zero, which is an epiphany to some people. The return is generated from the market and things like job growth and wage growth and in-migration and out-migration and the remaining availability of developable land and so on. But you are leveraged when you plant that small equity seed.
You are totally. And the other fascinating factor, and this is chapters 9 and 10 of book number 2. The whole first book and most of the second book are a history of what has happened. And what I do in those last 2 chapters is I take everything we've just gone through, everything we've learned about what is, the best of my knowledge, the most exhaustive study that has been done about what really happens with home prices, and I apply them to the future. And I look at a future of population growth, and I look at a future of less and less land available. I look at a future of people wanting to buy more and more in certain urban areas and coastal areas and so forth. And if you take what we've learned about inflation over the years, and we take the current situation with the explosive growth in the national debt and what that's likely to do with inflation over time, and then we take in the multiplicative relationship with the different factors that are fundamentally increasing home prices. And then we take in the multiplicative factors again when we talk about buying something with a mortgage. And it's a veritable explosion in wealth that could very well occur. It could be some of the best results we've ever seen in our lifetimes. And if you have that research and you understand what has really happened in the past, what the real sources of wealth have been, and then we apply what you're talking about more population, smaller areas, smaller building area, and so forth, the results are simply amazing.
Well, Daniel, this has been great, and you've done some remarkable deep work on wealth creation and home ownership. You articulate that so well with your books. Tell our audience more about how they can get a hold of your books and learn more about your work.
The best place to go is danielammerman.com, where I've got a lot of resources, including the first chapters of both books. Those can be read for free. If people are interested, then go ahead and buy them. Otherwise, just go to Amazon or most places that books are sold. I know Barnes & Noble has them, as well as other places like that. And you should be able to order them online without any problem.
Daniel, this is the type of stuff I could talk about for hours. I enjoyed it very much. Thanks so much for coming back on to GRE.
Yeah, it's good to talk with you again, Keith.
Yeah, well, Daniel articulates this multiplicative relationship to a homeowner's return because of the mortgage. And of course, much of a homeowner's or investment property owner's return comes from that debt, that leverage. If you've got, say, a $500K property with no debt on it, and it goes up in price or value 5%, well, then your return is just that meager 5%. So what? But alternatively, if you've got a $500K property with $400K of debt on it, and therefore $100K of equity, well, then if your property goes up in price 5%, you've got a strong 25% return, not just 5%. That's because you got a return on both your money and the bank's money. That all goes to you. So yes, with that mortgage, your 100K of equity became 125K. If you want to learn more about Daniel and do a deep dive about homeowner wealth with his books, his last name, Amerman, is spelled A-M as in Mary, E-R, M as in Mary again, A, and then N as in Nancy. Just like we've done every single week here since 2014, I'm Keith Weinhold, and I'll be back right here next week to help you build your wealth. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.